So let's begin with the story of the New Testament. There are actually several stories of the New Testament. The most important is the story of the Christian faith that is presumed by all the New Testament authors. And what we're going to do in this course is we are going to try and discover what that story is, what are the elements of that story. And it is no surprise that central to that story is what God has done through Jesus of Nazareth, making him the Messiah, the Christ, his Son, Lord, raising him from the dead, and promising to establish his kingdom. So we'll look at aspects of that story and how each New Testament author tells a part of that story. We'll also look at the story of the writing of the New Testament books. That is, how did they come about? Who wrote which book? When did they write it? To whom were they writing? What are some of the key things that they had to say and communicate? And we'll also look at the story of Christian faith that is told in each New Testament book. Not just the one that is presumed by all the New Testament authors, but actually what each one has to say. So, the story that they all presumed, the story of how each book came about, and the story that they have to share or state or teach in their books. Well, a very good question that we should be asking is, why do New Testament stories matter? Do we have to believe anything the New Testament authors believed about Jesus in order to have a Christian faith? This is a very good question because there are a lot of people today who claim to be Christian, and yet what they claim as central to Christian faith varies significantly. Some will claim that Jesus is the exclusive, only way to God, and that no one can approach God except through faith in Jesus as the Messiah. Others will claim that Jesus was a man, and that as a man, he believed certain things, he practiced certain things, he taught certain things, but he died. He did not rise from the dead, but nevertheless, he is worthy, because of the nature of his teachings, to follow and to wear his name. Those are two very different positions, and yet both positions claim to be Christian. So we should ask whether or not we should believe anything the New Testament authors believed about Jesus and about what God is doing in the world, and look at what they taught, be aware of what they taught and what they believed, so that when we claim that, or if someone should claim that they have a Christian faith, you now have a standard by which to measure that claim. This is a question about the authority of the New Testament to both define and shape what is Christian faith. Not everyone who claims to be a Christian believes that the New Testament is the sole authority to define and shape Christian faith. But as you will come to discover, there is much that is said in the New Testament that should be considered authoritative. And if the New Testament are in the inspired Word of God, as many believe, then that means that they stand in a unique authoritative position to define what Christian faith is. Do we have to believe all the New Testament authors in order to legitimately claim we have Christian faith? This is, again, another important question, because it recognizes that the New Testament authors believed lots of different things. And it may be that there are certain things that they believed that today people may not believe. And if we decide not to believe something that the New Testament authors believed, does that mean that we can no longer have a Christian faith? And as we look and investigate the New Testament authors, you'll begin to see certain things that they believed. Some of these things are simply a part of the world in which they lived in. But some of these things happen to be very central to the nature of Christian faith. Can other early non-biblical Christian authors be used instead of New Testament authors to define Christian faith? There are actually some today who are looking at non-biblical Christian texts, such as Gnostic texts, and want to use those texts to define Christian faith. Both this question, the last questions, really do have to do with the New Testament as the exclusive canon for Christian faith. Is there something outside the 27 books of the New Testament that can legitimately be held as contributing to the definition of Christian faith? In this course, I am going to presuppose that they do not, that the canon is closed, and that these 27 books alone define the nature of early Christian faith as God intended it to be communicated. Can the New Testament stories be trusted? Some people certainly might ask the question, isn't it true that we don't know exactly what the New Testament authors actually wrote? There's been a lot of interest lately in the history of the transmission of the biblical text. Everybody knows, or many people know, that our Bibles were constructed on the basis of lots of manuscript evidence. Most people know that we do not possess the original autographs or the actual original writing of any New Testament author. What we possess today are copies or copies of copies or copies of copies of copies of copies. And so what happens at times when people copy is people make mistakes, or people make intentional additions or make intentional omissions. And so those additions or omissions in some way may corrupt or change the message. And so there has certainly been a lot of discussions about whether or not what we have today as the New Testament adequately represents what those authors wrote. Well, there are several things that we do have that should give us confidence that what we have is adequate or reliable. We certainly have more manuscript evidence for the New Testament than we have for other well-known ancient literature, such as the writings of Plato or Aristotle. We have much more literature that accounts for what those authors wrote, what the authors of the New Testament wrote, than we do for other great pieces of ancient literature. And those are not questioned nearly as much as what the New Testament are. Also, the manuscript evidence that we have to reconstruct what the New Testament authors wrote is closer to the time when those authors wrote than the time period between other ancient literature and the copies that we possess today of them. So that should give us some cause or reason to have a great deal of confidence that the New Testament that has been constructed based on the copies that we have are very likely to be close to the original of what was written. Aren't there contradictions in the New Testament? Sometimes people will get parallels of the first three Gospels and notice differences, and sometimes people will look at maybe Gospel of Matthew, Mark, and Luke and compare it with the Gospel of John, and there certainly seems to be very big differences between the story of Jesus that is told. Or they might look at what one author says about Jesus and compare it to something else that another author will say, and it might look like contradictions. Or there's a famous one where Paul talks about that we are saved by faith and not by works. And in the book of James, James claims that we are saved by faith and by works. And so many of these examples are used and lifted up as evidence of contradictions in the New Testament. But what we'll discover is that it's very important that we understand both the purpose of New Testament authors, what they were trying to write, what they were trying to communicate, and make sure that we read carefully their statements in light of their overall purpose. And when we do so, we see that many of these seemingly contradictions are not contradictions at all. And how can we be certain that the story wasn't accidentally altered? Well, we do know that scribes did alter texts. There's plenty of evidence plenty manuscript evidence to indicate this alteration. But nevertheless, those alterations are not substantial in terms of the core teachings of the New Testament. In other words, the great story that is presumed by the New Testament author is not affected at all by the changes that took place in the history of the creation of manuscripts of the New Testament. And so it doesn't appear that the great story, the key element of the story of Christian faith, was altered by the authors of the New Testament or by the copyist of these authors. And so that takes us then to the end of this first section on why study the New Testament, or looking at the New Testament. Does it matter? It certainly does matter, because it is the foundation of the Christian faith, and anyone who wants to understand what historically was the Christian faith, or who wants to evaluate claims by others of having a Christian faith, should be aware of the story or the content of the New Testament.